Hello everyone, this is Michailidis from Ancient Greece Revisited with another book review. This time we're going to talk about a book that some may consider a self-help book. Yes, in Ancient Greece Revisited, revisiting a self-help book. But this one is special, in fact very special. It's called The Soul's Code, written by one James Hillman, who back when I first read it, didn't realize he was pretty famous in the United States. In fact, one source claimed he was the most famous psychoanalyst of his time. James Hillman was a Jungian, so he took from the works of Carl Jung, but took it to an extreme that a lot of Jungians that I had the pleasure of interacting didn't really consider him part of his school. Like, the main thing that made me talk about this book in this episode is that Hillman, apart from trying to do exactly what the book promises, decode the soul and its destiny, is bringing back, is revisiting, if you will, an ancient perspective on not just human destiny, but how the entire universe functions. So it brings the answer to what we've been trying to argue against in some of our episodes, to the scientific, modern scientific materialist viewpoint. So here's the deal. In our modern understanding of how things work, we are led to believe that the world is almost like a giant billiard ball table. We don't know exactly who or what made that first strike, but once it happened, everything followed suit in a deterministic way. One chunk of matter hitting against another, and yet another, from the Big Bang till today. In theory, if we could input all these variables inside of a computer, it would tell you exactly what I'm about to say in the next very moment, meaning that I do not even have free will, which is a perspective that many are increasingly believing. But it's a perspective that makes sense. It makes sense from a scientific point of view. It's what I call the pushed from behind of a viewpoint, which has been ridiculed in one of our videos. It's a domino view of the world. From the Big Bang till now, you can imagine giant domino line. Something happens, makes the universe come into existence, then one event leads to another event, leads to another event, till me talking to you here. James Hillman brings something else to the table. I was tempted to say something new, but it's actually something very ancient, which is what we call a teleological understanding of phenomena, right? Telos from Greek means end, but not end as in the end of a film or the end of an appointment. It's the resolution, the everything coming together. It's what draws things in. You can imagine telos is what we call the ends. Some of you can have a plan in their heads about what they're going to do next year. I can inquire and say, yes, but to what ends? Meaning, what are you trying to achieve? What is the essence of what you're doing? Some of you may have heard the expression, the ends of man, which means like, what is man meant to do in this life? So it's not the end as the last point of a timeline. It's more of a conclusion that shows the meaning of what it concludes. So teleology is the science that investigates things in reverse, if you will, from their end, trying to discover what is the end of things. James Hillman, in his book, The Soul's Code, tries to do exactly that. And the image he wants to give us of what our destiny might be is that we often argue between two primary forces that define human motives, nature and nurture. Nature, our genes, our encoding, and nurture, how we grew up, what was the environment, what early influences did we have. And psychologists, biologists, various disciplines are arguing between the two. James Hillman tells you that both, as distinct as they are belong to one end, which is the beginning, not the end. It's the beginning of life. You are born with a certain gene pool, and you are born inside of a world, inside of a worldview that pre-existed you, with parents that pre-existed you, a culture, a language, a tradition that pre-existed you. So both nature and nurture are before you. In front of you, James Hillman claims there is a destiny, there is a force, there is something that is pulling you, not just pushing you, but pulling you actively towards something. You may never achieve this something, but the force, the pull is there. You have to learn what that pull is and understand that it's telling you something. In fact, James Hillman brings back the Socratic idea of the demon, or genius, as the Romans called it. Socrates very famously believed that he was somewhat consulted, if you will, by a demon. Demon meaning an intermediary entity between men and gods back in ancient Greece, right? So a spirit that consults him, that tells him what not to do, as Socrates famously said in his trial. James Hillman believes that that is actually correct, that every single one of us come here with a genius, with a spirit, with a demon that is the agent of our destiny, the destiny being almost like a point in the future, almost like a black hole that's pulling things in a very physical way, by the way, a point that organizes events. So all we can do is try to read what is happening to us, not in terms of the past, not in terms of our childhood traumas or random events, but in terms of the future. In other words, to decode the soul, you look around, you look at your life situation, and you wonder, what could be the moment in the future that's going to justify all that? What am I being pulled towards? What is that force field that organized these events in the way that they are? James Hillman gives a few examples of notable and perhaps less so personalities. One such that perhaps illustrates this example is Manolete, was a famous Spanish bullfighter who almost reinvented his art during his lifetime. Manolete exemplified all the virtues of a bullfighter. Some of you may have read Death in the Afternoon by Ernest Hemingway, where Ernest Hemingway talks about that bravery, that masculine energy that is required, right, to become a bullfighter. Manolete, however, started life as a very timid young boy, fragile, polite, introverted, nothing to inspire someone to call this boy a future bullfighter, right? But Manolete says you have to look into the details and reinterpret. And one interesting and funny and quite insightful is that, judging from things that were written, Manolete as a young boy would literally run, as the expression goes, behind his mother's aprons, right? So he was so timid that whenever someone opened the door, he was so scared he would run behind his mother and pull her dress to hide his face. In the macho culture of Andalusia, this was unacceptable. And we can imagine Manolete or his family being somewhat ashamed of this behavior. Now, the push from behind Freudian scientific materialist theory would tell you that because Manolete was shy, he compensated or overcompensated by becoming this brave bullfighter, right? So all that was great about him was nothing but kind of an inferiority complex, if you will, which is a very bleak image of human nature, right? That whatever we do, it's some kind of childhood trauma, someone hurt us at school, some breakup, something. But Hillman says, how can something great arise from something not that great, you know? And James Hillman believes we have to look at things in reverse. And he notices how this movement of picking his mother's apron and pulling it in front of him resembles that of a bullfighter, as if he had the bullfighter's instinct all along that tells him that when something scary comes at you, what you do is take a piece of cloth, and protect yourself, right? In other words, he was kind of born a bullfighter. He just never exhibited his masculinity until it was needed. And as for Manolete, so with everyone else, myself and yourself included, we have to read what is happening to us teleologically, the way an ancient Greek would think about it. What is this force that is pulling us and that is organizing our life around it? That's a question that Hillman asks, and I believe that he gives you sufficient hints in this book to kind of decode your soul, as the title implies. So it's a book that I enjoyed reading. Read it back when I was visiting New York, jet lag, waking up 4:30 in the morning, had the pleasure of seeing this great city wake up with me, sun rising, James Hillman book in my hands, looking down on New York, waking up, if you will. Something in this event, I'm sure, is telling of my own destiny. I just don't know exactly what.